Padre Pio was in the confessional when an elderly man, well past 70 years old, came stumbling in. The man could barely walk. He was visibly ill. But what struck Padre Pio the most wasn't the man's physical condition at all. It was something he saw deep within the man's soul. Padre Pio remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Are you the head of your household?" The man confirmed that he was. He'd been married for over 40 years, had 5 children and several grandchildren. Padre Pio then posed a question that seemed to shock the man to his core. He said, "And how many of them still attend Mass?" The man fell silent, visibly uncomfortable. Padre Pio pressed on, "Of your 5 children, how many still practice the faith?" The man lowered his head, almost in shame. He confessed, "None of them." Padre Pio then inquired, "And what about your grandchildren?" The man responded, with obvious pain, that his grandchildren hadn't even been baptized. His children felt that religion was a thing of the past, that everyone should choose their own path when they were old enough. Padre Pio closed his eyes. When he opened them again, tears were streaming down his face. He said, with a voice full of sorrow, "Do you understand the weight you carry? Do you realize the responsibility that rests upon your shoulders? You were the head of this family, the spiritual leader, the guide. And where did you lead them?" The man started to cry. He was clearly devastated. He said he didn't understand. He'd always worked hard. He'd provided for his family. He'd given his children an education. He thought he'd been a good father. Padre Pio interrupted, his voice stern but filled with compassion. "You gave them everything, except what truly matters. You gave them food, but not the bread of life. You gave them education, but not eternal wisdom. You gave them a house, but not their heavenly home." This conversation took place in 1962 in San Giovanni Rotondo, and it reveals a truth that most modern men refuse to face: the spiritual responsibility of the head of the household. In the scriptures, this responsibility is clear. The man is called to be the spiritual leader of the home, the one who guides his family towards God, not away from him. But what has happened in recent decades? Men have abdicated this responsibility, delegating spiritual formation to their wives, to grandmothers, to priests, to anyone but themselves. And Padre Pio witnessed the consequences of this every day in the confessional. He confided in his fellow friars that one of the saddest things he witnessed was entire families drifting away from God because of the father's negligence. It wasn't necessarily that the father was an atheist or that he forbade religious practice. In most cases, the father was simply indifferent. He didn't oppose it, but he also didn't lead it. He didn't prohibit it, but he also didn't encourage it. And this indifference was more destructive than open opposition. Padre Pio explained it this way: when a father openly opposes the faith, the children at least know there's something he opposes. They might question it. They might investigate it on their own. But when the father is simply indifferent, the children learn that faith doesn't matter, that it's something optional, secondary, disposable. That elderly man in his 70s who entered the confessional wasn't an enemy of the church. He was a baptized Catholic. He'd made his first communion. He'd been married in the church. But after the wedding, the faith gradually dwindled. At first, he'd gone to Mass with his family, but little by little, he began to have other priorities: work, football games, Sunday rest. Mass became something he did occasionally, not every week. His wife continued to take the children, but the children noticed that their father didn't go, and they started to ask why. His wife made excuses. She said their father was tired, that he'd worked hard during the week, that he'd go next time. But children aren't stupid. They see the truth. They perceive what is a priority and what isn't. And little by little, the children started to imitate their father. First, they wanted to stay home too. Then they questioned why they had to go if their father didn't. Then they simply stopped going. When the children grew up and left home, none of them maintained any religious practice. Why would they? The model they'd seen at home was of a father who didn't practice. Padre Pio asked that man, "What did you do on Sunday mornings while your wife took your children to Mass?" The man thought for a moment. He said he slept, or watched television, or read the newspaper. Padre Pio said, his voice laced with sorrow, "And your children saw that. They saw that you preferred television to God. You preferred the newspaper to the Word of God. You preferred sleep to the Eucharist, and they learned from you." The man tried to defend himself. He said he always encouraged his children to go to Mass, that he never forbade anyone. Padre Pio responded, "Paying lip service while setting the opposite example is worse than saying nothing at all. Your children didn't listen to your words. They saw your actions, and your actions said that God wasn't important." This is a truth that many fathers need to hear. Children don't do what their parents say. They do what their parents do. If the father says that faith is important but doesn't practice it, the children learn that faith is just empty talk. If the father says that honesty is important but lies, the children learn that honesty is negotiable. If the father says that family is important but is always absent, the children learn that family is secondary. Padre Pio saw this with supernatural clarity. He recounted the case of a family who visited him in San Giovanni Rotondo, the father, the mother, and 3 teenage children. When Padre Pio looked at them, he said something strange. He looked at the father and said, "You brought your family here, but you don't lead them at home. You've left your wife to carry the spiritual weight alone. And now you want me to fix what you've neglected for years." The father was shocked. How did Padre Pio know? Padre Pio explained, "I see souls. I see the connection between you. I see who leads and who follows. And in this family, the one who leads spiritually is your wife. You have abdicated your role." The father tried to justify himself. He said he worked hard, that he came home tired, that his wife had more time for those things. Padre Pio cut him off, his voice firm. "Time? Do you think leading spiritually is a matter of time? It's a matter of priority. You find time for what you consider important, and clearly your family's faith isn't on that list." The wife started to cry. She'd carried this burden for years. She'd tried to keep her children's faith alive while her husband was absent, and she was exhausted. Padre Pio addressed her with compassion. "You did what you could, but it wasn't your role to do it alone. The husband is the head of the household, and when the head is absent, the body suffers." This image is biblical. St. Paul teaches that the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. And Christ didn't abandon the church. He didn't delegate his responsibilities. He didn't absent himself when things got difficult. Padre Pio used this passage frequently to confront men. He would often say, "You're quick to claim you're the head of the household when it suits your authority, but you forget that the head is responsible for the body. Christ gave his life for the church, and you can't even spare an hour on Sunday to lead your families to Mass." Once, a man responded to Padre Pio that his wife was more religious than he was, that she had an easier time with those things. Padre Pio responded, "And you think that exempts you? On the contrary, it increases your responsibility. You have a woman of faith by your side. Instead of letting her carry the weight alone, you should rise to her level. Instead of using her faith as an excuse for your negligence, you should use it as inspiration for your conversion." That response left the man in silence. Padre Pio continued, "Do you know what the greatest gift a man can give his wife is? It's not jewelry. It's not a house. It's not financial security. It's spiritual leadership. It's guiding her to heaven. It's ensuring that she and the children reach eternal life. One of the most impactful stories Padre Pio told was about a man he met in the early years of his ministry. The man was a farmer from the region, hard-working, honest, a good neighbor. Everyone respected him, but he didn't practice the faith. He had been baptized Catholic, but never took religion seriously. He said he believed in God in his own way, that he didn't need a church to have faith, that his conscience was his guide. His wife was devout. She went to Mass every Sunday. She prayed the rosary. She tried to raise her children in the faith, but the husband didn't support her. He didn't forbid it, but he didn't participate either. When the children asked why their father didn't go to Mass, he said that everyone chooses their own path. The children grew up. None of them maintained the religious practice. The faith dwindled. The grandchildren were born. None were baptized. When the farmer reached 80 years old, he started to get sick. Death was approaching. And then something strange happened. He started having terrible nightmares. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming. He said he saw horrible things, that he felt an enormous weight on him. His wife, already very old herself, didn't know what to do. She called a priest. The priest came and tried to hear the man's confession, but the man resisted. He said he hadn't done anything wrong, that he had lived a good life, that he didn't need confession. The priest insisted. He asked about the nightmares. The man finally told him he saw in his dreams his children and grandchildren, but he didn't see them as they were in life. He saw their souls, and their souls were in the dark, lost, wandering without direction. And in each dream, a voice asked, "Where did you lead them? Where did you guide them?" The priest understood. That man was being confronted with the consequence of his negligence. He hadn't committed terrible crimes. He hadn't been a monster. He had only been indifferent. And the indifference had cost the souls of generations. The priest told this story to Padre Pio years later. Padre Pio said, "That's the silent tragedy. The men who don't commit great sins, but who fail in the greatest duty, guiding their families to God. And when they reach the end of their lives, they realize that they have left a trail of lost souls." Padre Pio didn't tell these stories to scare people. He told them to awaken them. Because the truth is, most men don't even realize the impact that their spiritual presence or absence has on their family. They think that as long as they pay the bills, as long as they aren't violent, as long as they are physically present, they are fulfilling their role, paying lip service. But Padre Pio saw something different. He said, "The father is the spiritual leader of the home, not ordained, but called by God to that function. When he abdicates that priesthood, the family is left without spiritual protection. It becomes vulnerable. It becomes exposed to influences that the father should be combating." A friar asked Padre Pio why the spiritual leadership of the father was so important. Why couldn't the mother assume that role? Padre Pio's response was profound. He said, "The mother can and should participate in the spiritual formation of the children. Often she does it better than the father. But there is something in the father's leadership that is irreplaceable. When the father leads, he is saying to the children, 'God is important enough that I, the strong man of the house, will bow before him.' When the father is absent, he is saying, 'God is a woman's thing. Religion is for the weak.'" That subliminal message is devastating for the children, especially for the boys. Padre Pio observed that boys who grew up without seeing their father practicing the faith rarely became men of faith. They associated religion with femininity, with weakness, with something that wasn't for them. And so, generation after generation, the faith dwindled in the families. The pattern was always the same. Grandfather practicing, father occasional, son absent, grandson atheist. Padre Pio called this spiritual erosion. He explained, "Faith isn't lost all at once. It erodes little by little. Each generation that practices less passes on to the next a weaker faith until there's nothing left. And the point where this erosion started, almost always, was in the father. When the grandfather practiced and the father began to drift away, the process of erosion began, and once started, it was very difficult to reverse. Padre Pio saw this pattern repeating itself in families throughout Europe. It wasn't an Italian phenomenon, it was universal. He commented once to an American friar who was visiting San Giovanni Rotondo, "You in the United States think you are different, that this problem is European, but I see American pilgrims every day, and the pattern is the same. The fathers abandoned spiritual leadership, and now they reap the bitter fruits of that negligence." The friar asked how this had happened, how an entire generation of fathers had abdicated that role. Padre Pio responded, "It was gradual. First, they said that religion was everyone's business. Then, that the children should choose for themselves. Then, that the church was optional. Then, that God didn't exist. Each step seemed small, but in the end, the distance traveled was enormous." He used an analogy that the friar never forgot. Padre Pio said, "It's like a boat adrift. On the first day, you barely notice that it has moved. On the second, a little more. But after a month, you are on another continent, and you don't know how you got there. The fathers who abandon spiritual leadership do so little by little. First, they miss a Mass. Then, they stop praying as a family. Then, they stop talking about God. And one day they wake up with atheist children and don't understand how it happened." You see, that analogy was powerful because it showed that the loss of faith was rarely a conscious decision. It was a series of small omissions that accumulated over time, and the father, as leader, had the responsibility to keep the boat on course. When he let go of the rudder, the entire family drifted. Padre Pio also observed that many parents used the excuse of modern times to justify their neglect of their spiritual duties. They would say, "Times have changed, today is different, you can't force religion on anyone. Kids need to find their own path." Padre Pio would respond, "Times always change, but God does not change. The truth does not change. The need of the soul does not change. Using modern times as an excuse is admitting you follow fashion, not eternity, that you fear the judgment of the world more than the judgment of God." One father once argued that he didn't want to impose his faith on his children, that it would be authoritarian. Padre Pio chuckled. It was one of the few times someone saw him laugh during a serious conversation. He said, "You impose that your children brush their teeth. You impose that they do their homework. You impose that they eat their vegetables. You impose that they wake up early. And you don't think that's authoritarian. But when it comes to the soul, suddenly you become a Democrat. You are not being respectful of their freedom. You're being a coward. You're running from your responsibility." The father was speechless. Padre Pio continued, "You know what the truth is. You don't want to lead spiritually because it's hard work, because it demands you be the example, because it puts you in the position of having to live what you preach. It's easier to say, everyone chooses their own path, than to have to walk it yourself." This direct confrontation was Padre Pio's style. He didn't sugarcoat the truth. He didn't seek approval. He sought conversion, and conversion only happens when the person faces the reality of their sin. Padre Pio told the story of a man who came to him desperate. The man had 2 adult children. One had become a militant atheist. The other was living in sin, completely rejecting the church. The father didn't understand how this had happened. He was Catholic. His wife was Catholic. They had baptized their children. They had given them their first communion. Padre Pio asked, "And after first communion, what did you do?" The man thought. He said they continued to go to Mass when they could, that they celebrated Christmas and Easter, that they had a statue of the Virgin Mary at home. Padre Pio said, "When you could, that's the key. You treated the faith as something you practice when you can, when it's convenient, when it doesn't interfere with other things. And your children learned exactly that." The man protested. He said that life was hectic, that he had to work, that the kids had activities on the weekends. Padre Pio responded, "And now you have time to come to San Giovanni Rotondo, asking me to solve what you didn't solve in 20 years of fatherhood. Time you had. Your priorities were just wrong." This confrontation was typical of Padre Pio. He didn't soften the truth to make people feel better. He confronted them with reality so they could change. And many men changed after hearing those words. One of them was a businessman from Chicago who visited Padre Pio in 1959. The businessman had built an empire in business. He was rich, respected, successful by all worldly standards. But when he entered the confessional, Padre Pio said, "You built an empire of sand. Your business will pass. Your money will pass. Your reputation will pass. And what will be left?" The businessman was confused. He didn't understand what Padre Pio was talking about. Padre Pio explained, "You dedicated your life to building something that won't last. Meanwhile, you neglected the only thing that could last forever, the souls of your children. You put them in the best schools, but you didn't put them in the school of Christ. You gave them all the material privileges, but you didn't give them the only privilege that matters, to know and love God." The businessman tried to defend himself. He said his children had everything, that they never lacked anything. Padre Pio said they lacked the main thing. They lacked a father who showed them there's something more important than money. They lacked an example of a man who kneels before God. They lacked spiritual leadership. And then Padre Pio did something that the businessman never forgot. He said, "You still have time. Your children are still alive. They can still be won back, but not with words. With example. You need to convert first. You need to become the man you should have been. And then your children will see the change. And some of them may return." The businessman cried. It was the first time in decades that he had cried. He returned to Chicago, a different person. He started going to Mass every day. He started praying the rosary with his wife. He started talking about faith with his children, not as a sermon, but as a personal testimony. At first, the children thought it was strange. Their father had never been like this. Some suspected it was some midlife crisis, or that he was sick. But over time, they saw that it was genuine, that their father had really changed. Of the 4 children of that businessman, 3 returned to the church, not immediately. It took years, but they returned. The 4th child never returned. He died in an accident before he had a chance to reconcile with God. When the businessman learned of this son's death, he ran to San Giovanni Rotondo. He was desperate. He wanted to know if his son was in hell, if all his neglect had condemned that soul forever. Padre Pio received him with compassion, but also with truth. He said, "I cannot see the final destination of all souls. That belongs only to God. But I can tell you one thing. God's mercy is greater than any human sin. And your son, despite having turned away, was baptized. He received the mark of Christ. And God does not abandon his own." The businessman cried. Padre Pio continued, "Pray for him every day, offer masses, do penance. The church teaches that we can help the souls of our loved ones, even after they're gone. Don't give up on him. Keep fighting for the salvation of your son, even now." This guidance brought some peace to the businessman, but it also brought an important lesson to all who heard this story. The spiritual leadership of a father doesn't end with death. Keep praying, keep interceding, keep offering sacrifices. The battle for the souls of your children can continue even after the death of one of them. Padre Pio told another story that illustrated the power of a father's late repentance. An 85-year-old man came to him. He could barely walk. He was clearly in the last months of his life. He confessed that he had been an absent father his whole life. He had worked too much. He had traveled too much. He had left his wife to raise the children alone. And when she died, he realized he didn't know his own children. They were strangers to him. Now, about to die, he wanted to know if there was still something he could do. Padre Pio asked a surprising question. "Do you still have the strength to write?" The man said yes, with difficulty, but he could. Padre Pio said, "Then write a letter to each of your children. Ask for forgiveness. Tell them you know you failed. Tell them you love them. Tell them you pray for them. And most importantly, tell them you found God at the end of your life and that you wish for them to find Him too." The elderly man in his 70s protested, "They won't read it. They hate me." Padre Pio responded, "Maybe they won't read it now, but they will keep it. And one day, when they are suffering, when they face their own crises, they will remember that there is a letter from their Father that they never opened, and they will open it, and your words may be the instrument that God uses to reach them." The elderly man in his 70s wrote the letters. He died 3 months later. 10 years later, one of his sons appeared in San Giovanni Rotondo. Padre Pio had already passed away, but the sisters who cared for the sanctuary recognized the last name. The son recounted that he had kept his father's letter for years without opening it. He had too much anger, too much resentment, but when his own marriage entered a crisis, when he found himself repeating the same mistakes as his father, he finally opened the letter. And his father's words, written on his deathbed, transformed his life. He wept, he repented, he returned to the church, he saved his marriage, and now he came to thank Padre Pio, even though he was already in his heavenly home. This story shows that it's never too late for a father to try to make amends for his mistakes. Even at the end of his life, even when it seems impossible, God's grace can use any gesture of sincere repentance. The businessman wrote a letter to Padre Pio, thanking him. He said that confrontation in the confessional had saved not only his soul, but the souls of his descendants. Padre Pio responded, "It wasn't me. It was the grace of God. But you cooperated. You had the humility to recognize your error and the courage to change. Many men hear the truth and reject it. You heard it, and you acted. That is the difference between those who are saved and those who are lost." According to Padre Pio, it's not that some are sinners and others are saints. All are sinners. The difference is that some recognize their sin and change. Others recognize it and ignore it, or worse, justify it. And when it came to spiritual leadership in the home, Padre Pio saw that most men fell into the category of those who ignored or justified. They knew they should lead their families toward God, but they found 1,000 excuses not to. The job, the exhaustion, the lack of time, the personal faith that doesn't need church, the wife who already takes care of it, the children who are free to choose. Excuses, all excuses. And Padre Pio dismantled them one by one. About the job, he said, God is not going to ask how much you made. He's going to ask how many souls you helped save. And the first souls under your responsibility are those of your family. About the exhaustion, he said, Jesus was tired in Gethsemane, so tired that he sweat blood. But he didn't abandon his mission, and your mission is much easier than his. About the lack of time, he said, you find time for television, for sports, for hobbies. If God isn't on your schedule, it's because you've excluded him, not because there's no space. About personal faith, he said, Christianity is not an individual religion. It's communal. It begins in the family. If your faith is so personal that it can't be shared with your wife and children, then it isn't faith. It's pride in disguise. About delegating to the wife, he said, would you delegate your job to your wife and expect her to support you? Then why do you delegate the most important job of all, which is the salvation of your family? About the children being free to choose, he said, do you let your children freely choose if they go to school, if they go to the doctor, if they eat nutritious food? Then why do you allow them complete freedom when it comes to the most important choice of all? The freedom of children is not an excuse for the negligence of parents. These answers from Padre Pio were cutting, but they were necessary, because many men only awakened when they were confronted like this, when the excuses were dismantled, and only the naked truth remained. I have failed my family. If you've made it this far in this video, you probably recognized yourself in some of these descriptions. Maybe you are a father who has abdicated spiritual leadership. Maybe you are a child who grew up without that example. Maybe you are a wife who carries this weight alone. Regardless of your situation, there is hope. Padre Pio always emphasized this. While there is life, there is possibility of change. That elderly man in his 70s who staggered into the confessional didn't hear from Padre Pio that he was condemned. He heard that he could still change, that he could still pray for his children and grandchildren, that he could still give testimony even at the end of his life. Padre Pio said to him, your children may not return while you are alive, but your prayers will continue working after you depart. Pray for them every day. Offer every pain that you feel for them, and trust that God, who is more merciful than any human father, will find a way to reach them. Padre Pio also taught that elderly man in his 70s a specific practice. He said, every time you feel physical pain, every time suffering comes, offer that suffering for the conversion of your children and grandchildren. Say, Lord, accept this pain for the salvation of my family. Transform what remains of my life into a living prayer for them. The elderly man in his 70s followed this guidance. He lived 3 more years, all in increasing suffering due to his illness. But each pain was offered. Each sleepless night was consecrated. Each difficult moment was transformed into intercession. When he died, he left a letter for his wife explaining what he had done. The wife showed this letter to the children at the funeral. Something happened that day. One of the sons, the most estranged of all, began to cry. He said he didn't know his father cared so much, that he didn't know his father had spent the last years praying for them. That son returned to the church 6 months later. He said he couldn't get out of his head the image of his father offering every pain for him, that sacrificial love had broken down his defenses. Padre Pio knew that offered suffering has a mysterious power. That pain transformed into prayer reaches souls that no sermon could reach. And for fathers who had failed, this was a path of redemption. They couldn't go back in time and be the leaders they should have been, but they could transform the rest of their lives into an offering. They could make suffering a bridge between their past negligence and the future salvation of their descendants. This teaching about financial support for this channel makes sense at this moment, because you understand the value of what you are receiving. This type of spiritual confrontation is rarely preached. Most preachers soften the message so as not to offend anyone, but Padre Pio didn't soften it, and that's why his words transformed. The Super Thanks button down below is a way to support the continuation of this work. It's a way of saying, more people need to hear these truths. More families need to be awakened. If this video spoke to your heart, consider contributing. Every bit of support allows more videos to be produced, more stories of Padre Pio to be told, more souls to be reached. But regardless of financial support, what matters most is what you're going to do with what you've heard. If you're a father, ask yourself honestly, am I leading my family toward God or away from Him? If you're a mother carrying this weight alone, don't give up. Continue praying, continue setting an example, and invite your husband onto this path, not with nagging, but with love. If you're a child who grew up without this example, know that you can break the cycle. You can be the first of a new lineage of faith. Your children and grandchildren can have what you didn't. Padre Pio used to say, "It's never too late to start, and it's never too early to start either." Let me ask you a direct question. Fathers, are you leading your families toward God or away from Him? Don't answer automatically. Think, analyze your actions, not your intentions. Do you go to church with your family? Do you pray with your children? Do you talk about God at home? Do you set an example of a man who humbles himself before the Creator? If the answer is no to most of these questions, you know what you need to do. Write in the comments, "I will lead my family to God." If you already do this, write, "I already lead my family to God." If you're a mother who carries this weight alone, write, "I need prayers." If you're a child who wants to break the cycle, write, "I will be the first." These comments create a community. They show that you are not alone, that others are on the same journey. And remember the words of Padre Pio. The father is the spiritual leader of the home. When he leads toward God, the entire family is blessed. When he is absent, the entire family suffers. May Saint Joseph, the model of a father and head of the household, intercede for all the fathers watching this video. May he inspire them to assume the role that God has given them. May he strengthen them in their difficulties. May he guide them to be the spiritual leaders that their families need. And may Padre Pio, from heaven where he is, continue interceding for all families seeking to draw closer to God, especially those where the father is absent, especially those where the spiritual erosion has already begun, especially those who can still be saved. The peace of Christ be with you and with your entire family. May the grace of God transform your home into a small domestic church where Christ is the center and all walk together toward eternal life.